She's having his baby after I cheated.
I cheated on my husband, and now my AP's ex-wife is pregnant with my now ex-husband's baby. The story starts at my daughter's soccer practice and involves myself, F34, my husband, whom we can call Harry, M37, Andrew, volunteer soccer coach for the little girls team, M30, and his wife, Clara, F26. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and my husband works in finance. We have a 7-year-old girl together and a 4-year-old boy. We've been together over a decade and married for the last 9 years. Even though we've been married so long, our relationship has always been great. We didn't fight. We spent our free time together doing family activities, and our sex life hasn't declined over the years. I truly felt fulfilled by it, as opposed to a lot of stories I read and hear from others. Harry had 3 girlfriends before me, and before my affair, Harry was the only man I'd ever been with. Everything was great, and we loved each other so much, and this is where I stupidly go and ruin everything. At my girls' soccer practice, there were a few parents who attended every practice and game. One of them was even signed up to be stand-in coach, and we'll call him Andrew. Andrew and I saw a lot of each other since he worked from home and could be there every practice just like me. We'd stand at the sidelines and speak while the kids played. It started innocently enough with some jokes and some pleasantries and so on. Nothing extraordinary. Sometimes I got the feeling that he was looking at me for a bit too long or insinuating some sort of attraction to me, but I thought it was all in my head and wafted it away, feeling a little stupid and full of myself. That is until he started showing more obvious signs of interest. He'd ask more personal questions, sharing things with me, always keeping me a seat next to him and making more flirty jokes than before. I didn't push back. I guess some part of me liked the attention, and I thought it was all innocent since I had never had any intention of ever cheating on Harry before, and the thought never even struck me. Then, after a while, when Andrew and I were sitting next to each other at the sidelines like always, he relaxed his arm and let it hang in between the seats, and he started playing with my fingers like he wanted to hold my hand. I moved back a bit to see if it was by accident, but he did it again. I felt a slight panic, and I took my hand away. I asked him, "What are you doing? I'm married, and so are you, by the way." He said, "Yeah, but didn't you like it?" I blushed all the way down to my neck, and I told him never to touch me again, and that we should probably not sit together anymore. I should have pushed back harder than that, I know that now, but I suppose I was too naive, and I know that it's not always a good idea to reject a guy outright because of how some of them react. I guess I thought he'd get the hint. We'd had our little moment, and now it was over. I didn't say anything to Harry, though, which is the one part that makes me question my own motives after the fact. Right then and there, I didn't think I should, because he might tell me not to go to soccer practice anymore, and I really liked that time with our daughter. For a while, Andrew did keep his respectful distance, although he did keep looking at me from afar and smiling sadly and waving when our eyes met. I kept standing a few feet away from him at all times, but I couldn't stop looking up at him. Then came that fateful day, when my daughter was running a bit late, and I noticed Andrew's daughter had left her gym bag behind at one of the practices. I stared at it for a while, and I thought of just leaving it there, but I grabbed it. Everyone's numbers and addresses are on the volunteer sheets that get passed around, and it didn't take much effort to find out where he lived. I dropped my daughter home, and I told her to go into her brother and tell Dad that Mom is just dropping off a gym bag for one of the other moms. That was the first time I outright lied. I shouldn't have. I should have left the bag. What's done is done, but I can't tell you how many times I play this over in my mind every day. What would have happened if I had just left the bag? I drove over to the address and I sat in the car for a while. I thought to myself that it was fine, and his wife and kids would probably come to the door. I'd drop the bag off, and that would be it. I walked up to the door and I rang the bell. Andrew came out to open, and his jaw dropped when he saw me. I said his daughter left the gym bag and I had to go. He looked at me with a slight smile, and he said thanks, and he held the door open. Without thinking, I stepped in. "Where should I put it?" I asked and looked around. He didn't say anything, but stepped up right close to me, reached in behind me, and he closed the door and locked it. We were so close to each other, I could feel his breath on my chin. My whole body started tingling. I reached the bag over towards him, but he grabbed my hand. I let the bag drop. He pulled me closer, and he kissed me. I said, "No," and stepped back. But when he let me go and took a step back, I felt this uncontrollable urge, and I grabbed around his neck and kissed him back. He grabbed me with both of his arms, picked me up, and carried me into the living room. Neither of us said anything. I wouldn't call the lovemaking passionate, but it was intense, rough, and we both finished explosively and quickly. As I took a few breaths and he wiped some sweat off his brow with his hand and sat back up, I came to my senses. I looked around inside the room. Everywhere were pictures of his wife and child, and I nearly threw up. The guilt and shame was overwhelming. I started crying violently. I sobbed and told him we couldn't ever do it again, and we could never even speak to each other again. I felt like I was going to throw up my guts, but I composed myself, went into the bathroom and cleaned myself up and took a few deep breaths. I stepped out into the hallway, and Andrew was waiting for me. "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" he said. He said it had been so hard keeping his hands to himself, and he couldn't believe that I was even attracted to him, so when he had the chance, he couldn't stop himself. I said I felt sick, and that I wanted him to stay away from me from now on. He said he understood, and I left and drove home. I don't know when I decided not to tell Harry all this, and how I could keep my mouth shut about it once I saw him. Fear, I suppose, and some false sense of if he doesn't know, it won't hurt him. The whole family greeted me at the door, and I told Harry some bullshit story about one of the other moms being in some sort of distress, and I had to stay and talk a bit longer. Everyone bought it because we trusted each other. To this day, it makes me feel insane and disgusted. I tried to stick to my guns, and I avoided Andrew at soccer practice, but I still went to them and stayed for all of them. I'd stand at the opposite side of the field, or several feet behind him. I didn't engage in group conversations that he was a part of, and I always made an excuse to go to the toilet or go make a phone call when one of the other parents said anything involving him. Then one day, he came up to me and said there was something we needed to go over in regards to the kids' annual fee for practice. I said, "Okay, show me." He said it was best if I followed him to the office where the computer is. Because he was coaching, he had a key to the facilities for closing up and locking up the equipment, etc. I reluctantly agreed, and I followed him. He unlocked the door, but as soon as I stepped in, he closed it and came up really close to kiss me. He was already hard as a rock and pushed up against me. I said, "No, we can't do this again, it's not right." He said, "I know, but I can't stop thinking about how tight and wet you are." I pushed him away a bit, only allowing him to give me pecking kisses. He touched me all over and I started losing control. I said I have to go. He nodded and kept going in to kiss me. I told him to stop, even though I started leaning into it. He said, "All right, but before you go, can I just have one proper kiss to remember you by?" I stopped pushing. He held his hand on my cheek and kissed me, deeply. His hands started playing with my breasts, and before I knew it, there was no turning back. He turned me around and took me over the desk so hard, he had to hold his hand over my mouth so I wouldn't scream. Afterwards, I started feeling sick with myself again. I angrily got dressed, told him to stay away from me, and stormed out. I got my daughter, drove home, and had a long shower. I cried silently and swore to myself that this would never happen again. This time, I made more of an effort. I didn't speak to Andrew at all, and I even let my parents drive my daughter to practice a few times so that I wouldn't be tempted. One of the days, Harry had an afternoon off, and he suggested we should all go to practice and go out for ice cream after. I argued against it at first, but I didn't want to arouse any suspicion, so I gave in and came with them. While I was getting something from the car, I came back to see Harry and Andrew speaking to each other. My heart twisted itself into a knot and I could barely breathe. I walked up closer, but I felt like anyone would have been able to see how stressed out I was, and I stayed back a bit. Seeing them together made me feel anxious, afraid, ashamed, and irritated, but there was some small part of me that felt strangely excited by it. Even though the secret was shameful and disgusting, it was exhilarating. It seemed like Andrew thought so too, because I'm sure that's what prompted him to try and speak to me again, and what prompted me to not walk away. We stayed behind the next soccer practice, and he said he agreed we shouldn't be keeping this up, and that he loved his family as much as I loved mine, but that he'd felt more sexually alive this past while than he had in years, and he wanted one last thing to hold on to for a rainy day. I reluctantly agreed, and I stupidly decided that it would be best if he came to my house when Harry was at work. I gave him instructions to park up the opposite street and walk over, hidden by the shrubs, on the next day while Harry was working. We'd sleep together one last time, and then it would be officially over. No play dates with the kids, no soccer practice at the same time, no interacting with each other's families, nothing. Unknowing that I was planning my own D-Day, I got the guest room ready. I took the picture of Harry and me down and put it in the master bedroom, and I waited for Andrew to come over. He did as we said and parked up the opposite street, went in through the back garden and snuck up to the side door where I let him in. He was all over me from the start, and I led him to the guest room where we got on top of the bedspread. We kissed and cuddled and drew it out for as long as possible, since it was really going to be the last time. We undressed slowly and caressed each other's bodies, kissing and holding and stroking. And then, it happened. I looked up, and there was Harry in the door. He had his phone up, camera pointed right at us, and his eyes were absolutely wild. "What the hell is going on here?" he yelled. I pushed Andrew off me and fell onto the floor, and I started crying. "Please, I can explain," was all I thought of to say. Not sure what I was going to explain, I just panicked and didn't know what to say. Andrew completely lost it, and I guess he didn't know what he was thinking, because he tried to bolt and get past Harry. Now, Harry is no small guy. He's over 6 foot and weighs over 200 pounds, whereas Andrew can't weigh more than 160 and is maybe 5'9". So when Andrew came at him, he just bounced off and fell down. He stood back up on wobbly feet and tried to charge at him again, but this time Harry pushed him back. Even though he only used one hand, he sent Andrew flying, and he hit his ribs against a chair. I tried to get in between them, pleading with Harry not to do anything stupid that would send him to prison, but he only looked at me with disdain. He grabbed Andrew by the arm and started shoving him out of the room. Andrew tried to run away, but getting pushed again, he kept falling over, getting visibly bruised. He opened the front door and Harry was right out there. One of our neighbors came rushing over, asking Harry if he was okay and what was going on. Harry just said, "Call the police," and went back inside. I tried to get dressed as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop anything that was happening. With no knickers and my pants half on, I hurried out to the hallway, where Harry was walking out holding Andrew's phone. He said, "Unlock this now." He stared at him a bit, naked and shivering on the ground, but there was no getting any sense out of him. Harry sighed loudly. "Okay, I'll just get your wife's number off the sheet from soccer practice then." Please don't call her, please." Andrew lay on the ground, begging. Harry looked at him as if he were a pathetic little worm and walked back into the house. I didn't know what to do, I just stood there crying. Harry came out with the phone to his ear. He spoke calmly, like he was ringing about just anything, but I'll never forget that phone call, or how Andrew started throwing up outside. "Yeah, hello, Claire. Sorry to bother you, but I'm here with your husband, Andrew." "Yes, well, no, he's not working. You see, my neighbor called me about some strange-looking man trying to break into my house, and imagine my surprise when I came home to find Andrew there, screwing my wife. Yeah, I'm not super happy about it either. I just thought you should know. Okay, bye." The police came around, and Harry walked indoors. I tried to stop him in his tracks. I pleaded for him to look at me, and I cried and told him I was sorry and that I loved him more than anything. He stopped for 1 second and gave me a vicious look. "Do not speak to me." That was all he said, and I didn't. I looked out, and Andrew was crying and shaking violently as he got questioned by the police. I don't know exactly what was going on, but I got to hear afterwards that he wasn't very coherent, begged them not to tell his wife, and that he didn't want to press charges for being assaulted. Eventually, the police came with Harry into the house, retrieved Andrew's clothes, and sent him on his way. They asked me if I was afraid for my safety and if I had anywhere to go. I said I didn't want to leave, but Harry interrupted the conversation, handed me my phone, and said, "Ring your mom and get out of my sight." Like a shamed dog, I packed up a few things in a bag. Whenever I tried to look at Harry or talk to him, he sighed and left the room. I was sobbing so much I could barely talk anyway, and when my mom came over, I completely broke down. To make matters worse, Harry made sure to come in and tell her exactly why I had to leave the house. I'll never forget the way my mom looked at me when she realized what I'd done. Harry said he'd let the kids come home from school and keep living in the house to not disrupt them too much, and we'd work from there on what was going to happen. On the way back, my mom barely said a word to me. I just went into her apartment, sat up in a room, and cried myself to sleep. For the next few days, I tried to call and text Harry, but he must have blocked me to think it over. I hadn't seen the kids in so long, and I was starting to wonder if I should just get over there and take my chances. Then, the text came that crushed me even more. He said to come to the house the next day to discuss the next steps. He said he had told the kids what happened, that he had a restraining order against Andrew for his own protection, and that pretty much everyone knew already, so there was no need for me to try and twist the narrative, which hurt me down to my core. I couldn't believe that he would think I'd do that, even though I intellectually understand how he couldn't put anything past me at that point. He said he'd sorted out someone to watch the kids so we could talk privately. I replied back with okay, not wanting to aggravate him in any way. I asked my mom to drive me over. Harry waited by the curb, and when I told my mom to leave, he leaned in and said, "No, I want you to be close by so she can leave as soon as we're finished." He walked me inside. I looked around in the house we'd gotten together, and the life I had walked away from with one stupid mistake after another, and it was like something inside me died. I tried to cling on to any hope. I tried to hug him, my husband, whom I loved more than any person in the world, and he just pushed me away. He handed me separation papers and said he'd spoken to a lawyer who helped me draw everything up. He said I could stay in the guest room until I had found a job and somewhere else to live. But I would have to actively look for both accommodations and a job, or I would have to go back to my mom's apartment. We'd split assets 50-50, our accounts would be separate. I sat there while he was going through everything like an emotionless business machine, and every time I tried to say something, he just kept talking louder until I shut up. I didn't hear half of what he was saying, but he gave me copies of everything so that I'd have a reference on what to do. I would be allowed back to see the kids the following week. I cried even more, and I begged him to just talk to me. He didn't want to. I cried that I loved him, and only him, and that I couldn't live without him, and I would do anything in my power to get him back. He looked me dead in the eyes and then just shook his head. "You know what?" he said. "Since everything in your power doesn't include not screwing other men behind my back, I'm not interested. Now get out and take your papers with you. I'll see you around the kids, and that's it." Harry and I started living together again. For the first while, things were cold between us. Any attempt at communication that wasn't related to the kids was shut down. The kids were really nervous, cranky, and sad all the time, and it was difficult for the both of us to make them feel okay about the situation, since everything was so tense between their father and me. After a while, Harry seemed to do a little better, though. We could talk with less strain, the kids didn't seem as uncomfortable anymore, and family dinner started to feel like normal again. In fact, it was feeling so good and natural that, when he asked me to talk in private and got a babysitter for the kids, I thought he meant he wanted to start reconciliation. I was so excited. While he was driving them away, I even put on nicer clothes and fixed my makeup and sat and waited for him. He walked in and saw me, and for the first time in a good while, there was something else than familiarity or anger behind his eyes. Compassion. He sat down and put on his explaining voice. He hadn't meant to lead me on, he said. He said he thought that since he had been clear from the start, I wouldn't think there was any hope for us left. Ever. I felt like my heart crashed through the floor even worse than it did on D-Day, and I cried. He wanted to go through with the divorce, and he had even gone so far as asking around for open jobs in the area and gotten me an interview. It all went numb from there. I took the information and I left to go to bed. It all went so fast from there, I barely had time to catch wind. I found a 2-room apartment that Harry urged me to take since it would be in my price range, and I'd be able to move on faster if we didn't live together. I didn't argue because I was so devastated, and I moved out. I got the job he had gotten me set up with and am now working in a bakery in town. I spent my days decorating the apartment to make it a nice place for the kids, even though it's cramped. Whenever they have the choice of where to go, sleep, or have friends over, they choose the old house. It breaks my heart, but I understand them. They're only kids. I thought that would be the worst of it, and I guess some part of me was still hoping Harry would come to his senses and ask me back into the house. But one day, I got news that once again sent me down a deep, dark hole. Harry and Claire were officially a couple. I tried not to drag the kids into it and question them about this, but I didn't have to. They were happy to tell me. They said, "Dad and Claire are doing stuff to the house. We're getting to switch up the rooms, and there's no guest room anymore, because it's going to be a baby room for the new baby." I almost dropped down onto the floor hearing that. The new baby? I asked them. What new baby? So apparently Claire and Harry had not only gotten together, they were expecting a baby and living together in my house. They were going to put the baby in the guest room where everything in my life went to shit, and now I'm sitting here in a small, crappy apartment, eating ramen and crying to myself. That evening, after the kids had fallen asleep, I rang Harry to ask him about it. He was very dismissive over the phone, and I could tell Claire was on the other end, just waiting for him to hang up on me. I said, "What is this? When were you planning to tell me? How did this even happen?" He was quiet for a while, and then he coldly said, "Well, Claire and I just had a lot in common. Then he hung up on me. I sat on the floor crying, I don't even know how long. To make matters worse, in light of their new peaceful life, Harry informed me that I wouldn't be speaking directly to him anymore unless it was an emergency concerning the kids, starting next week. I could email his work email and I could bring official documents and such to the letter bow, but we weren't on speaking terms anymore. He said it's how Claire and Andrew were talking these days, and she said it was working great, so he wanted to give it a try, although I know Claire must have put him up to it since he wouldn't have done that to me himself. I've heard from others as well that Andrew was stopped for some misdemeanor a while back and Claire used that as basis to get full custody of their kid, and he's on such a downward spiral he might not make it out. I know he hurt Claire, but I still think she's being unnecessarily cruel to the father of her child. There's not much I can do about it. I'll just watch from the sidelines as everything goes great for them and to shit for me, I guess. I'm so depressed. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm failing at being a single mom and at working, just like I did marriage. I need some sort of hope that this is all going to work out for the best because I can't take this much longer. I know I can't go back and change the past, but if I had a time machine, I would go back and never pick that godforsaken gym bag up. Maybe never even sign my daughter up for soccer in the first place. What am I supposed to do?
If you've reached the end of the story, thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below.